Today's guest is a very, very special friend of mine and someone who I adore and love beyond belief. Probably a little bit unprofessional making the intro like this, but I really do love Dr. Tom McCoy so much. He's also very fondly known to me as Dr. Get Your Morning Sun. So, Dr. Tom McCoy is the co-founder of McCoy Medical and also serves as the Director of Health and Performance Optimization. He is dual board certified in family medicine and obesity medicine. He possesses a master's in bioethics as well. McCoy Medical champions an integrative approach to health, mirroring Tom's belief in merging lifestyle and medicine. Apart from his clinic, Tom co-owns and trained at Sugar and Falls CrossFit in Northeast Ohio, emphasizing health optimization through movement, diet, and mindset. Passionate about the outdoors, especially backcountry bow hunting, Tom sources much of his family's food firsthand. Residing in Northeast Ohio with his wife Caitlin and 2 children, Tom exemplifies a life intertwined with nature and authentic living. And that is why I love and respect him so much. Welcome, Tom. I'm so happy to have you here.
Karin, it is so exciting to be with you. It's been too long, so I'm glad we could manufacture this opportunity to get to talk.
Oh, I love it. Well, I want to hear everything. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to dive into not only the world of medicine, but now this world of really looking at lifestyle interventions as the way to go and the cure to chronic disease?
Yeah, gosh, we may need more than an hour, but I can try and give you the translated version of that. So, I trained in the traditional Western model at a county hospital in the Bay Area, which is a unopposed family medicine program at a county facility, which is fantastic because without a residence there, we actually ran the facility and did everything. So, ran the ICU, did our own C-sections, delivered, countless babies. I delivered my own kids there. So it was really a great experience. So a lot of the folks that come to train there do so because they want to be able to practice in austere environments. So most individuals will end up working overseas or in very remote or underserved areas in the United States. And philosophically, I wanted to get a training and a background that would allow me to add value in any sort of situation. And I came out of that experience with a lot of exposure to different medical specialties, and I fell in love with emergency medicine. And one of the cool things about this program and the facility is that you could then focus in one of these areas, even though you had this broad-based training. So I ended up practicing emergency medicine for, the next 13 years and was director at the county hospital in the emergency department for, I believe, 8 years or so, which was just an unbelievable experience. I mean, we, ran the detention center health. So anybody who got arrested or was incarcerated, we took care of. We had the only lockdown psychiatric facility in the county. So anybody who got placed on hold would come to us. So truly a cross-section of humanity and experience there. In addition to that, one thing that you get exposed to when you work in that environment is people who have pretty advanced levels of disease at a relatively young age. And so one thing that I was exposed to on a daily basis was the manifestations of advanced metabolic dysfunction, ultimately, which can result in cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, and people who really didn't have to be in that situation. And when you're on the hamster wheel in our Western model and having to do what you can in a very short amount of time, knowing that you really don't have the elbow room or the bandwidth to address root cause, it eats at you. And to fast forward, eventually I was able to take steps to where I could really put my money where my mouth is to a certain aspect and start to practice in a way where I really had the room and develop the expertise to help guide people through a lifestyle concepts approach to optimize their health, performance, and well-being.
Oh, Tom, I honestly, what an incredible, incredible journey. I remember when you worked in the emergency department. Like, I remember so well. That's when we met, when you came to all the CrossFit events. And I remember that transition of you wanting to kind of get out of it and start your own thing. So tell me a little bit more about McCoy Medical and what inspired you to get this up and running.
Yeah, I think, it's an important thing to unpack and really for people to hear. And where a lot of folks that I talk with now about, how our practice is structured and how I make a living, it's like, well, how do I do what you do? Um, it's a very hard question to answer because I don't think the path is going to be the same for everybody, because medical training and how our system is designed and structured right now is not built to be able to give you the room to have these conversations, to practice health optimization and preventative medicine in the right way. Because to do it the right way takes time and knowledge and resources that the system doesn't teach you and doesn't give you, because of the way that it's built. So ultimately, for me, it got to the point to where I needed to make a change so that I could have the space in the room to actually sit with people and get to know them and understand them and what motivates them and what the true root causes of them not reaching their health and performance goals were, before I could begin to talk about lifestyle concepts or other things that are going to begin to address that. Right. And so for me, that was really the primary driver. And walking the walk is something that I take very personally. And I think from a legitimacy standpoint, being able to sit with someone and never asking them to do something that I haven't done myself, and to understand the roadblocks and obstacles that come up with that is really empowering, I think, for the person who's sitting across the table from me. I think going back to your initial question, I went to all of those events just because I loved it, right? And had a passion for it. And I knew that there was something there, but I didn't know what it was. And I think this principle of doing the thing, getting good at the thing, and then having that be the way that you can theoretically make your living is something that takes time and diligence and perseverance. But a lot of us now, because of this instant gratification society that we live in, it's really tough to wrap our heads around the, well, what's in it for me today kind of mentality. And I think, for me, it took years and years of spending time around high performers and other individuals who were really stuck in their health journey, and then going through the process of educating myself in lifestyle concepts and the underlying foundational principles of health that were really going to address root cause and let people be the best versions of themselves and achieve the goals that they had set out for themselves. But even more importantly, realize that there is a whole other level of opportunity that they never even realized was going to be there for them, in the mindset and the situation that they were in at the time that we met.
That's powerful. Okay, going back to your work in the ICU, you mentioned talking about root causes, right? Because you're only treating the symptoms.
Yep.
From that experience, and also obviously everything that you've done after that, what are the greatest contributors to these root causes of chronic disease, of the manifestation of chronic disease?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I've structured our practice here so that the first thing that we do is a deep dive assessment of those aspects that I think are the main drivers, right? Both for health optimization and if they are dysfunctional or not optimized, chronic disease and morbidity and ultimately mortality, right? For me, it starts with sleep. And it's just ironic that something that all of us do every day is something that so many of us struggle with and is still one of the hardest things to optimize. But when you talk about a foundational health pillar that in one fell swoop can decrease your risk for metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, while at the same time, because we work with a lot of individuals who have very high level athletic goals and are, if not professional athletes, at the same time can optimize performance and recovery and coordination and agility. One thing can do that, and it's sleep. And I don't care how good you think your sleep is, usually there is going to be a way for the vast majority of us to improve it. So sleep is where we start. Next on the hit list for us would be, your nutrition strategy and how you're fueling. It's going to be different for every individual. And it's one of the reasons that, we felt really driven to get additional education and expertise in this area. Is, we went on to get a board certification in obesity medicine and do other nutrition certifications. My co-founder, Jen Pishko, is doing a master's in nutritional education. So this is something that we feel really passionate about. And the problem is now is that we're so inundated with information specifically around nutrition, as this is a one size fits all solution. We pride ourselves on really getting to know the individual, their unique life circumstances, their family and work dynamic and balance, to come up with tools and strategies that are really going to allow them not only to optimize their health, but also their athletic performance and their goals. And it's different for everybody. And so, I'll see patients all day, and I'm never really having the same discussion about, how we're going to fuel for success and health. The third piece is going to be your strength and conditioning component of your health span and lifespan strategy. I break that into 4 buckets. The first is mobility and range of motion. We sit too much. We don't move enough. And so adequate mobility in all of your joints and pliability in your tissues is paramount. Second to that is a strength component. It's very common for us to get anchored in one particular area of exercise. Frequently we'll meet with folks and it's like, okay, well, what are you doing right now? It's like, oh, well, I run or I walk. And you're never going to be the best version of yourself if we are not expanding that fitness amoeba, right? Which is something that I know you're familiar with our CrossFit backgrounds, right? But having an adequate strength training program to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, to optimize lean body mass, to build that at the appropriate point in your lifespan, to mitigate the decrease, right, that happens as we grow older, right, to minimize the potential for injury or fracture that can happen with falls as we get older, to maintain independence, which is directly correlated to health span, quality of the years that you have, is paramount. So if you aren't lifting and you aren't lifting heavy, if you aren't pulling, pushing, and hinging, then that needs to be addressed. The third component would be higher intensity interval work. We'll talk about this at some point, but one of the things we focus on is we need to get used to and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. In high intensity interval work, as it translates to having your VO2 max either in your above average, high, or elite for your age group, is something that all of us need to do. It's really cool because we measure this on everybody that comes into our practice, and across the board, CrossFitters do wonderfully in this, right? Because we tend to live a lot in this high intensity interval world.
Yeah.
And so for the most part, their VO2s are outstanding. The one area, which is the fourth piece for me, is really zone 2 work. And that's something that, traditionally hasn't been a big area of focus, at least within the CrossFit space. But the really cool thing that we've been doing recently, and I think you and Jen had talked about this a little bit, was just the 5K a day protocol that we had done, and that Mike Giardina had done with us. and that you can still continue to do activity, but if you understand what your zone 2 is, if you've actually had it measured, which we do when we do your active metabolic rate analysis, and you know what that heart rate zone is, you can incorporate different movements so that you don't go out of your mind sitting on a bike for 60 minutes, doing the same thing, right? So by introducing some variability and changing up the routine, it can be stimulating and I think beneficial from a physiologic standpoint, but still allow you to get the zone 2 benefits of upregulating mitochondrial density and function for fatty acid oxidation, which is metabolically protective, which is what all of us need, right? And then the biggest box, Karin, which I think all of us to a certain degree leave unattended, is training our minds.
Oh,
Uh,
thank
when
you.
you talk with folks today, and I just think, the longer your existence is on this planet, you come to realize that we tend to be the biggest drivers of our own suffering.
Yeah.
And that if you aren't actively cultivating a therapeutic and appropriate mindset as to your thoughts and your stream of consciousness and how you put that into perspective and how it impacts you from a stress load and from an allostatic stress load, uh, it's going to be hard for you, even if you do everything else correctly, to
Wouldn't.
truly be happy, which I think ultimately is what all of us want, right? And it doesn't matter if you have, the physique that you've always wanted. If you're a sad soul, what good is it? And so to be the best version of yourself, you really want to be touching all four of those pillars foundationally before we really even look at anything else. And that can be, a multi-year process, because these are things that if they're going to be done sustainably and in a way that you can truly incorporate these habits in a meaningful way, it's done in small bits over time. And then that cumulative impact, in a relatively short amount of time, 6 months or a year, can be transformational. But folks, they have to buy in, and you have to be process focused as opposed to goal oriented. Goals are fantastic, but if your goal is to have a six pack and 6 weeks down the line you don't, you're going to give up. So
Yeah.
you have to fall in love with the work and the process, and the end goals take care of themselves.
But beautiful, beautiful words. I mean, that was just, I was like, oh, there's our summit talk for sure. I mean, that was incredible. I love that that is what you're teaching, and that I also see that's what you live, right? And to me, one of the greatest compliments anybody could give is that you walk your talk. You show up as you are showing other people how to show up. And so I just have the utmost respect for you and all you do. And as a friend and a physician and everything, like every role that you play, you are exactly as you say you are. And that to me is so beautiful. Um, After the compliment, I want to focus on what is the definition of health optimization. Optimizing everything is such a buzzword these days. It's not my favorite word, I have to tell you honestly, but you work with health and performance optimization, and I want to understand what that means.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's going to be different for different people, right? I think that I have to sit down and understand what someone's goals are, and they're going to be different for a professional athlete than they may be for my next door neighbor. That being said, I do take a human first approach, even for my elite and professional athletes, right? If you are a foundationally healthy human, you're going to be a better athlete, right? So when we talk about health and performance optimization, I don't care, what level you are at your sport. If you are sleeping 4 hours a night and think that you can train your way out of, insufficient recovery, you're never going to perform optimally. I think as a general principle, when we look at society as a whole and trying to define health, and if I had to pick one principle that most of us could apply, to improve our health, it would be to seek balance. And it may not be in the sense that you necessarily think, because modern society is essentially designed in a way for us to live at a level of comfort and convenience that we are not physiologically and biologically and genetically designed to flourish in.
Yeah.
And because of that, we have to exert energy and effort to seek discomfort, which runs to a certain degree against how we're hardwired,
Yeah.
but ultimately benefits us from a biologic and emotional standpoint, right?
Yeah.
And so these are some of the hardest things for people to do, but it's one of the reasons why the first thing I do in the morning is jump in a freezing cold tub of water, right? We respond well to appropriate both physiologic and emotional stressors in the appropriate dosing to optimize our health and well-being. And for most people that we interact with, it's about seeking appropriate forms of discomfort through your exercise regimen, appropriate constraints or parameters around your nutrition strategy, because we're not designed to have unlimited ad libitum access to calories at any hour of the day without having to actually lift a finger or get off the couch when people can deliver it to our doorstep, right? And so this principle of self-induced hardship is one that you have to cultivate over time. But I think once you start to experience that and the benefits that come from these different life experiences, that initial inertia that you have to adversity in whatever form that it comes, it's much easier to get over. And that's one of the biggest things with health goals overall, is that they're compounding over time, right? And when you think about that from a principle standpoint, it's going to be quite a while before you really start to see manifested outcomes. And this is where people struggle, because they'll get 2 to 3 months in and they're like, oh man, I don't look that different, or I may not necessarily feel that different. And they can throw in the towel, right? But if you can get over that initial inertia, which is what we really try to cultivate in our practice model with combining fitness and community with medical expertise and support, you can leverage the tribe and community to overcome that initial inertia from a human nature standpoint until you can start to see those goals that are compounding. And then it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy and self-reinforcing, because you feel it, you can see it, and you're like, okay, now I'm on my way. And it's that much easier to keep going and keep building. But that initial phase is where we really have to leverage these other tools to overcome that initial difficulty.
I love what you just said. I mean, I just made a note, self-induced hardship. We live in a society, as you said, where everything's just so easy, and we're taught that like we don't have to work hard for things anymore, and we shy away from anything that creates any kind of discomfort, whether it's starting a romantic relationship or just anything, right?
And, yep.
Anything we have, like we just shy away from this concept of everything. Like we just embrace this concept that everything needs to be easy. We can just manifest whatever we want instantly. And that's not the case. And I love that you are really honing in on that. You mentioned working with elite athletes quite a bit, which is phenomenal. What is the greatest lesson that you have learned from working with this group of humans who, is just above the rest when it comes to athletic performance?
That they're humans just like us.
I love that so much.
No, I think it's so funny because I've been really fortunate, and I mean it's so much fun to work with these professionals, in the NFL, the MLB, professional surfing, world champion CrossFitters. It's just fantastic, right? I think the thing that it's interesting to realize, and that most of us would assume, is like, oh, they got it all figured out. Like they know exactly what to do. They must eat perfect. They sleep great. And it's like, no, that most of the time it's much more dysfunctional than it is for the rest of us. They just have so much athletic ability that they're able to overcome that. Now, most of them have an inner drive and mindset that allows them to achieve despite addressing a lot of these other areas in ways that the majority of us can't, because that is just how they're wired. But the really cool thing is that healthy human first approach still applies to them, and they're still going to get the biggest benefit, just like we are, on optimizing sleep and understanding how to fuel. Now the nuances become different in between, when you're truly fueling for performance, right? Timing and macro distribution and carbohydrate, like all of these things become, much more significant from a timing and a quantity standpoint. And there's a lot of other things that we focus on in regards to hydration strategies and recovery protocols that are going to be unique to professional athletes. But I think the biggest takeaway is that when it comes down to it, we're all the same. And we all need to focus on the same things foundationally. And we're going to get the biggest return on investment by optimizing sleep, our nutrition strategy, our recovery protocols, and how we think about ourselves and see the world. And then we build from there.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And it's kind of the same with famous people as well, right? You look at them and you're like, oh, wow, their life is so great and together and they have access to anything and everything. And I was reading that quote or some passage by Steve Jobs where he was, on his deathbed or, close to it. And he was like, I have all the money and the success in the world, but I don't have my health. And so, we are nothing without our health. And that is such an equalizer. No matter what your status, no matter what your achievements, like your health is essentially all we have. You are a model of health. Take us through your daytime and nighttime routine, please. Like a day in the life of Dr. Tom McCoy. And you better bring morning sun in here because I added it to your bio and it's something that I think of every time I wake up and go into the
No, that's good. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is that I want folks to think about that. So, I mean, I will caveat all of this with this is what I do, but it's not what I would necessarily teach everybody to do, right? And I do these things because there are underlying biologic and genetic predispositions for me that make these the optimal practices and strategies for me to be the best version of myself. Okay. But I start my day with cold the vast majority of the time. The primary reason for me, right, which is interesting, has to do with my dopamine set point, which genetically there's different single nucleotide polymorphisms that can influence your dopamine set point. And I have a double wild type in my COMT SNP, right, which means that I tend to have a lower dopamine set point. And this is very common in people who operate in higher stress situations. So invariably, most of my professional athletes will be this. Like we've done work in my other positions with USA Boxing. Almost all of them are double wild types here. All of, pilots, ER physicians, ICU docs for the most part are always, because you gravitate towards professions that you can operate in and function optimally, why other people will shy away from that, right? So for me, my dopamine will tend to run a little low. And one of the things that cold does is it's one of the most powerful ways to boost endogenous dopamine levels. So it's essentially a mental health practice for me, let alone all of the physiologic benefits that come along with upregulating thermogenesis and brown fat and what happens metabolically, like tons of other benefits. But I do it for mood and behavior and emotional well-being. So plus the last thing that I want to do first thing in the morning is jump in freezing cold water. And so every morning we talk about, forced hardship.
Yeah.
I have to play this mind game with myself, like stop being a wuss, take your clothes off. I know it's still dark outside, but you're going to get in this freezing cold water and you're going to sit there for 3 minutes. I don't care how much my internal being is screaming, don't do it, don't do it. It's cold. What are you doing? This is crazy. You don't have to do this. So you play that game out in your mind. So it starts with cold. And then the next phase for me, right, is morning light exposure, right? So just 10 to 15 minutes if you can. And this principle that we always share with folks is, a good night's sleep starts first thing in the morning. And so this is really part of my sleep ritual because it helps set my circadian clock, how my melatonin is going to be secreted in the evenings, in addition to all the hormonal benefits and analgesic benefits that can come along with daylight exposure at other times during the day. But that early morning light exposure, and I stack that with a mindfulness practice for myself, is invaluable time. And when we talk about balancing allostatic stress load in our autonomic nervous system and practices that we're doing to upregulate the parasympathetic side as opposed to the sympathetic, which is the vast majority of what our society is now with social media engagement and how we spend all of our times on screens and just the pace at which we live, cultivating ways within your day to upregulate the parasympathetic side, both first thing in the morning before you start to engage in our modern world, and then the last thing in the evening as you're trying to downregulate your autonomic nervous system and upregulate the parasympathetic side to optimize your sleep and recovery and HRV. Those are two really important practices, right? I think principally throughout the day, one thing that folks could really benefit from is taking a few moments to get some natural light exposure outside. We tend to all dwell indoors all day with exposure to artificial light, which can be quite dysregulating to our hormones and circadian rhythm. So going outside, exposing ourselves to some natural light has analgesic benefits for chronic pain and recovery from injury. It has hormonal benefits from exposure to that higher light during the day, which all of us should tap into. So trying to find moments where you can get outside. So in between patients, like I'll try and book 5 to 10 minutes where I can even just go do a lap outside to reset. And it's as much about my nervous system as it is about exposure to natural light. And then I think the big principle to take away in the evenings is just cultivating your evening ritual. Most of us now spend time doing things that are completely opposite of what we should be doing before we go to bed. When we engage in our phones or social media without appropriate mitigation of blue light spectrum light, not only are we decreasing melatonin secretion and potentially increasing sleep latency and undermining the restorative nature of our sleep, we're also succumbing to upregulating our sympathetic nervous system by bumps in dopamine and catecholamines, right, which are going to make it harder to fall asleep, right? That's the slot machine designed to social media to keep you engaged in scrolling, is that it's stimulating and upregulating. And this is not what we want to be doing, right? And this is a really hard thing to change, right? Because it's a behavior mechanism that's ingrained. It tends to be the last thing a lot of us do at night, even while we're in bed, right? And so figuring how to cultivate your evening ritual, especially in conjunction with the ones that you love, and finding ways for them to buy in so that you can spend time together, bonding and communicating as a family, I think is a really important principle.
Love that. Okay, we need to carry on with your routine. So you've done ice plunging, cold plunging, and sunlight. I want to hear about exercise and nutrition as well.
Oh, man. So, I exercise way too much,
Oh,
but
you
that's,
do?
yeah. But I also own a CrossFit affiliate. So, I generally will coach a few times a week in the morning, and then
Wow.
we'll see patients, and then I go back, and fitness is paramount to me. I have to do it every day.
Yeah.
This falls into as much my physical well-being from a muscle protein synthesis, lean body mass, health span, lifespan component. But again, this comes back to emotional well-being for me, that I need that stimulus from a dopamine, and from a CrossFit standpoint, oxytocin, because what happens when you do hard things collectively in a group setting is very difficult to reproduce in our daily existence, right? Because we tend to be very isolated now, especially, how work has changed for many of us, and we're just engaged, in communicating via devices. The hormonal benefits that come along with doing hard things in a group setting is irreplaceable. And I'm an introvert. Like I don't really like people, but I physiologically, all of us do. We are tribal beings,
Yeah.
right? We need to engage
Yeah.
and work together as collective units. This
Yeah.
is how we're designed and hardwired.
Yeah.
And so if we aren't finding ways to tap into that and develop a sense of community and both shared hardship and shared accomplishment, we aren't going to be the best versions of ourselves. So I protect that time in my day like it's a precious metal. Like nothing is touching that. And so that block is there for me every day. Fueling, right? Again, this is going to be different for everybody. And so the discussion about what I do versus what I'm going to recommend for somebody else is going to be very different.
Yeah.
For me, from a body composition standpoint, it's all about hitting appropriate caloric intake to stay fueled and not in an energy deficit, and distributing my protein as evenly as I can throughout the day to get the most benefit from a muscle protein synthesis standpoint and to actually get enough in, which when you're a bigger person can be really challenging to do if you don't start early enough in the day. So, I tend to eat a lot of the same stuff pretty regularly. But what's interesting is that this comes back to how we talk about, the results of health being compounding, because, I'm a person that, used to live to eat and I still live to eat. Like I love food. I love good tasting things, but I am so much a better person and a better version of myself when I fuel in a way that supports my metabolic and emotional
Yeah.
health. And I know what things do that well for me and what things don't. Like that's what I crave now. Not to mention that how we eat cultivates and develops a microbiome which can actually stimulate and influence cravings and what types of foods we lean into over time, right? So I tend to be, pretty consistent about the timing of what I eat and when I eat, which is really important as well. And timing is something that, often is getting missed, and that the more consistent we can be at the time that we eat throughout the day, the more optimal our absorption and utilization of those nutrients is going to be. So as consistent as you can be around your fueling schedule, the more beneficial it's going to be. And that does really tie into the evenings as well, in that for all of us, we're tend to going to have a much more restorative sleep cycle if we aren't consuming nutrients too close to when we're trying to go to bed. And that can be a challenge, right? Because we're so busy and it can tend to push dinner later. But for all of us, if we can work to at least get a few hours in between when we stop consuming liquid and solid calories and when we go to sleep, we're going to get the most benefit from a metabolic standpoint, and we're not going to be undermining our recovery and HRV in our sleep cycles.
Tom, you are a wealth of information. I have learned so much from you during this talk. I wish I'd scheduled like a 3-hour interview, but we would have to get up and take a walk outside right during that time.
You would.
Where can people find you, and how can someone work with McCoy Medical? Tell us.
Yeah. So we see patients all over the country. And so we do work with folks remotely. We have a program where, because a lot of the initial testing and intake that we do is in person with your metabolic rate analysis, body scan analysis, blood work, et cetera. A lot of times folks will come into town for the weekend, work out with us. They can stay here, do all this initial testing, and then we can continue to work remotely with them. We can also arrange a lot of times to find resources to have this testing done where you are and continue to work remotely. You can find us at McCoyMedical.com. So McCoy-medical.com, and reach out to us there. But this is what we live and love. And so if folks are interested in exploring health optimization, health span, lifespan, and how to be the best versions of ourselves, we'd love to hear from you and work with folks.
Wonderful. And I will also link everything below. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for not only being a phenomenal friend, but a mentor, someone who's always there for me when I need you, and a phenomenal physician, coach, just being. So thank you, Tom. I adore you beyond belief.
Well, Karin, it was so great to see you. I'm glad we had the time, and we definitely need to schedule some more because there's a lot of other things we need to unpack.
Absolutely.